Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, DwyerVIP.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. You know, right now, if we were to think about heavyweight meccas, I would say that the Ukraine is awfully hard to beat as a country. Right? You have the Klitschko brothers, who are widely regarded as the legitimate heavyweight champions of the world. Right? Right below them, you actually have another fighter who needs to be in the conversation. His name is Vyacheslav Glazkov. He calls himself the Tsar. Understand, he has an Olympic pedigree. In fact, he was 2008's Olympic bronze medalist. Right? He is unbeaten. He has power in both hands. Right? This last weekend, in a fight that quite frankly should have gotten far more attention and should get your attention, he fought unbeaten heavyweight Malik Scott. Now let's talk about the United States, the heavyweight division in the United States. Now, boxing meccas for heavyweights change from time to time. There was a time when New York City, with Mike Tyson, Riddick Bowe, Shannon Briggs, and Mitch Blood Green, Mitch, we remember you here on YouTube, were big-time heavyweights and made New York City the heavyweight capital of at least the United States. Well, times change. Now, in my opinion, the heavyweight capital of the United States is the city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. To YouTube Nation, before I go further, let me just say, if you can think of another city with a better group of heavyweights, I encourage you to leave your opinion here where all can see it in the comment section to this video. But if you think about Philadelphia, you have really the godfather of Philadelphia boxing at the moment in the heavyweight division. I'm not going to diss Bernard Hopkins. We're talking about in the heavyweight division, not light heavy. That's Steve Cunningham. You also have Fast Eddie Chambers, who narrowly lost to Tomas Ademic with one hand. Then, of course, you have Bryant Jennings, unbeaten. Might be the most intriguing of all Philadelphia heavyweights because he is that rare combination puncher in the heavyweight division. And, of course, you have Malik Scott, who this weekend took on Vyacheslav Glazkov. Malik Scott, for those who don't know, is represented by the Goosen Group, well connected, and he's unbeaten, operating behind one of the heavyweight division's best jabs. Now, let me just say this. This fight ended in a draw. Both guys, Glazkov and Scott, remain unbeaten. You need to know of both of these guys as we talk about heavyweights and as some of the bigger names are bandied about. David Price, for example. The boxing hardcore needs to realize that Glazkov beat David Price in the amateurs. Right? Understand, Glazkov has already fought Adlanir Solis in the amateurs. Right? He's a guy who, quite frankly, has been in the ring already with some of the bigger known names in the sport. Right? It's only a matter of time before Glazkov, who's still in his late 20s, he's 28, emerges on the world stage and starts taking on some of these bigger names. Right? He just needs a little bit more experience before the public knows who he is. Quite frankly, I think he would be an intriguing matchup for some of these bigger names. And understand, Malik Scott style-wise, would be a difficult matchup for most in the heavyweight division. Now, Scott was very upset after this fight. He believes he got robbed. I looked at the tape. I believe Scott got robbed. Right? I thought Scott outworked Glazkov and did enough to win the fight. The goal here, though, isn't to make a case that Scott got robbed. It's actually to think about both of these guys style-wise so that we can analyze future fights. Right? So, just consider this video to be just a shorthand take on the strengths and weaknesses of both fighters. Let's talk about Scott first, right? Scott is very reliant on his jab. He's really a heavyweight wrapped around an excellent jab, right? He gives you angles, he moves his shoulders, but his game is really to have you run into his jab. He doesn't have a lot of power. He only has 12 knockouts, right? He has what I call a back foot game. In other words, he doesn't have to hunt you down to hit you with the jab. He's comfortable backing up. His interpretation of the sport is that if you're following him around the ring and he's able to hit you with jabs as he's backing up, then even if you're the aggressor for the entire fight and his back touches the ropes, as long as he's able to jab and counter you and dodge your punches, he's content. He's willing to win rounds that way. It all keys off of his jab. Let's talk about the problems, the kind of guys who could give unbeaten Malik Scott problems. Right? First, think angles. A southpaw might take away Malik Scott's jab. Think Tony Thompson, right? Because the southpaw lines up opposite the jab. He sees the jab coming. He can just duck his head out of the way, right? Think Gabriel Campillo against Tavares Cloud at light heavy, right? So, if Malik Scott were to fight a southpaw, I'd have to take a look at the films of that fight, right? That southpaw, to me, would have a little star next to their name. This could be a problem, right? A southpaw with foot speed's even a bigger problem, because the foot speed would tell me that this southpaw has increased maneuverability. So not only angle-wise would he have a chance to dodge Malik Scott's biggest weapon, his left jab, right? But the southpaw would also be able to have a greater chance of doing so because of the foot speed. Now, we didn't see that with Glazkov, right? Because Glazkov's not a southpaw, and Glazkov isn't blessed with a lot of foot speed, right? Understand, too, it's all about the angles. A southpaw with either height, just something that's different than the norm. A southpaw with height who knows how to use length. Again, Tony Thompson. Or, conversely, a southpaw who's short, who can duck under the jab. Let's pretend for a moment that young Mike Tyson, a right-handed fighter, was a southpaw, right? Understand, in boxing, it's rock, paper, scissors. Sometimes the guy who's shorter has the advantage, right? If I have to reach for you to find you, and I can't quite hit you flush with the jab, because you're shorter and you can duck under the jab. Think way back to Dwight Cowie, former light heavyweight champion, right? A shorter guy, especially a shorter guy with foot speed. People forget, young Mike Tyson actually moved quickly, right? A shorter guy with foot speed, in my opinion, would give Malik Scott problems. Also, a taller guy Again, length is key. Who could roll with punches. We'll call it head movement or just rolling with punches. Think Vitaly Klitschko. If he were southpaw, I believe he would give Malik Scott problems because, again, the southpaw stance with the ability to roll with punches would decrease the likelihood of Malik Scott's jab landing with the regularity Malik Scott needs it to be successful. Right? So those are the kind of fighters who I think would give Scott a hard time. Let's talk about Glazkov. Glazkov really reminds me a lot of Lucas Mathis. He's a Lucas Mathis type fighter. Right? In other words, he's hunting you down, but he's not in a hurry. Right? He's trying to apply pressure on you to wear you out. Quite frankly, Malik Scott is lucky this last fight was only a 10-round fight. Wasn't a 12-round fight. Right? Glazkov's the kind of guy who, quite frankly, if he has you using a lot of energy and not hurting him, right, he's content with that. As long as he has you burning yourself out and he's trying to cut off the ring. Here's the problem with Glazkov. Right? His game's a front foot game. He needs to be the hunter. He can't be the hunted. Right? That's a problem. If you can force Glazkov to back up, let's say he were to fight a Vitaly Klitschko who could bust him up with some jabs, right? And who has the power to dissuade a front foot heavy guy from coming forward, right? Eventually in Vitaly Klitschko fights, you'll notice even the Shannon Briggses of the world start to back up a bit, right? A guy like that would give Glazkov problems because Glazkov doesn't have the head movement, in my opinion, to get out of the way of the jab. And Glazkov doesn't have a plan B, doesn't have a back foot game. So if a Vitaly Klitschko cracks his front foot game, and Glazkov figures out that he can't continue to hunt down his Ukrainian countrymen, I believe the fight would be over at that point. Because Glazkov doesn't have the ability to literally on his back foot fight like Malik Scott. Right? Stick a jab, move, bank rounds without coming forward. Right? Also, I believe that Glazkov, just like Lucas Mathis, because he doesn't throw that many punches and it's not in a rush, is vulnerable to volume guys. Right? He can be outworked. So, think about a couple of Lucas Mathis fights. Lucas Mathis against Devin Alexander. Right? Alexander is pumping a jab. Now, whether Alexander actually won that fight's debatable. But understand, Alexander is pumping a jab. He's active. Sometimes that's enough for judges in rounds where no one gets knocked down and there isn't a lot of other action. Sometimes that's enough for judges to give the more active fighter rounds. Right? So, again, a Vitaly Klitschko against Glazkov. Well, if the two guys are together, Vitaly Klitschko's the one who's likely to be throwing the jabs, not Glazkov. Right? Glazkov, in my opinion, is going to have a hard time winning slow rounds against volume opponents. Right? You know, if you look at CompuBox numbers and you see before a fight that one guy throws higher volume than Glazkov and has enough defense for whatever reason. In Vitaly Klitschko's case, it's shoulder rolls and it's length, keeping you outside behind a jab, and you don't want to hop inside on Vitaly Klitschko because he has power behind that. Right? Same thing with Vladimir Klitschko. Understand, Vladimir Klitschko usually keeps guys occupied with the jab. In other words, those slow rounds, Vladimir is typically able to win them because he's the guy throwing more jabs. It's only against a southpaw, a Tony Thompson, where suddenly Vladimir couldn't land that jab with regularity, right? So, guys who can jab, who are more active than Glazkov, are going to give Glazkov problems. He's going to fall behind, just like Lucas Matthys fell behind against Alexander and against Zab Judah, right? And so food for thought on that. Let me also say, too, that Glazkov, you know where he is. He's going to be right in front of you. Guys with front foot games who need to hunt you down, you know they're going to be following you around the ring. What I've found, and I know I'm biased here, is that at the top end of the game, right, we'll call it the Mayweather, Martinez, Andre Ward end of the game, the great fighters keep you guessing on where they're going to be, right? They aren't following you around the ring. Sergio Martinez is a great example. He's a big puncher, right? If you look at his resume, you're going to be surprised how many guys he's just knocked out, right? Darren Barker, Paul Williams, Matthew Macklin. You know, for all of Sergio Martinez's boxing prowess, right? He's an excellent boxer. He's actually a knockout puncher. But yet, in Sergio Martinez fights, you never see him just stalking an opponent. He's always outside. He's always hanging around. In fact, he has a problem when the opponent doesn't stalk him. Think the early rounds of the Matthew Macklin fight, which I still believe are some of the most interesting rounds ever fought against Sergio Martinez, right? Martinez, even while he's dropping the Sergei Zinzuriks of the world, right? Again, he's a KO puncher. People need to realize that. You know, Martinez doesn't come across as a hunter, even as he's hunting you down. In my opinion, that's the top end of the game. Glazkov looks like a hunter. In other words, he's always hunting you down. Now, against most, they'll wilt. But against the top end, they'll use that against him. If Vladimir Klitschko knows that you're trying to hunt him down, and he knows where you're going to be, he's going to be hitting you with jabs all night long. The slick fighters find a way to avoid getting hit with jabs all night long. I'd be nervous taking Glazkov against an elite guy with a jab who has more volume than him, because you know where he's going to be. He doesn't have a lot of upper body movement. You know he's going to get hit with that jab. He doesn't have a lot of foot movement to get out the way of the jab. He's primarily a come forward, front foot game, two-handed, heavy puncher who's trying to cut off the ring on you. That's hard to do against a mobile opponent with a jab who can rely on length. So that's my take on these two fighters. To the boxing hardcore, let me just say you need to know who these guys are, right? Because these guys, quite frankly, are in the mix. These guys are contenders for the heavyweight title. So as the press focuses on a few people, right? David Price. Here in the United States, Seth Mitchell, right? Just understand there are other fighters out there. Think about it. HBO kept showcasing Seth Mitchell. One wonders if Seth Mitchell could beat a Steve Cunningham, an Eddie Chambers, a Malik Scott, a Brian Jennings. That's just in Philadelphia, folks. I haven't even gotten to other cities in the United States with people like Deontay Wilder and Tony Thompson. Just know there are heavyweights out there. Malik Scott, Vyacheslav Glazkov are two of the key names you need to know. Both remain unbeaten as I make this video. Thanks for watching. Let me hear from you. Leave your comments for me here online. If you feel that there is a heavyweight who the press has ignored, who has a viable chance to make some waves in the heavyweight division, like these two guys do, then I hope you leave that heavyweight's name here in the comment section of this video. Let's talk about it. Thanks for stopping by.